That overgrown snowdrift had better come home before I eat her dinner myself, Mercedes Whitmore muttered for the 7th time. She had reheated the stew twice, checked the road 6 times, and was now pretending the tight feeling beneath her ribs was irritation. The sun was already sinking behind Glacier Ridge. The forest had turned blue with cold, and Madge's bowl remained offensively empty. Her Great Pyrenees had never ignored a meal in 8 years. Madge had once returned from chasing a stag with a thorn in her paw, mud in both ears, and enough dignity to pretend none of it hurt. She had still arrived before the stew touched the table. "If you have joined a wolf pack," Mercedes muttered while fastening her cloak, "I hope they know how much you shed." Behind her, the drums of the Bonding Moon ceremony began in the village square. Tonight, every unmated wolf in the pack would gather beneath the full moon. They would dance, exchange hopeful glances, and pretend they had not spent the previous month asking relatives who might choose whom. Mercedes had repaired her only good dress for the occasion. She had even braided her pale gold hair. That effort had lasted until she crawled under the porch looking for Madge and emerged wearing 3 cobwebs and a dead leaf. Her neighbor, Lorna, leaned over the fence in a blue ceremonial gown. "She'll come back when she's hungry," Lorna called. "You're going to miss the first dance." Mercedes held up Madge's untouched bowl. "This dog once ate half a sack of turnips because breakfast was 6 minutes late." "Maybe she found a rabbit. Then the rabbit has learned to cook." Lorna glanced toward the dark tree line. The humor left her face. Rogues had been seen near the northern paths. The forest also held old traps, steep ravines, and enough hungry wildlife to make good judgment useful. Mercedes had never owned much good judgment. She owned practical boots, a healer's satchel, and a dog who should have been home. She picked up her lantern. Lorna tried once more. "Mercedes, the ceremony only happens twice a year." "Madge misses no meals a year." That settled it. Mercedes left the drums, lanterns, and possible mate behind. She crossed the frozen meadow while calling Madge's name. The cold sharpened as she entered the pines. Snow crunched under her boots, branches whispered overhead, and every shadow appeared to have teeth. "Madge!" she called. "If this is about the bath, I canceled it." Nothing answered except an owl. Mercedes followed a trail of paw prints through the first layer of snow. Madge's tracks were enormous and easy to recognize. They looked like 4 small plates had developed purpose. The prints led beyond the safe gathering paths and into the oldest part of the forest. Here the trees stood close together, their roots twisted through the earth like knotted fingers. The air smelled of pine resin, damp stone, and approaching frost. Mercedes found a tuft of white fur on a bramble. "Good," she whispered. "You're nearby, and you're still losing enough fur to make a second dog." Then she heard Madge bark. It was not the dog's usual greeting bark. It was not her suspicious bucket bark or her urgent cheese bark. This sound was deep, sharp, and protective. Mercedes ran. The lantern swung wildly. Snow slapped her skirts. She nearly lost one boot in a patch of mud and informed the forest that this was extremely inconsiderate. A clearing opened ahead. Madge stood beneath a huge oak with her white coat raised along her spine. Blood stained the fur around her muzzle. Mercedes's heart stopped. Then Madge turned, and Mercedes saw that the blood was not hers. An old man lay against the oak roots. His silver hair was wet with snow, his dark cloak was torn, and one leg bent at an angle legs generally avoided. Deep claw marks crossed his chest. More blood soaked the frozen ground beneath him. Madge stood over him like an enormous, angry snowbank. "There you are," Mercedes breathed. The dog whined, stepped aside, and immediately pushed her broad head against the old man's shoulder. His pale blue eyes opened. Even half-conscious, he looked commanding. He had the weathered face of a man accustomed to being obeyed and the current posture of a man whose body had filed a formal complaint. "Take your dog and run," he warned. Mercedes dropped beside him and opened her satchel. "I just spent 2 hours finding the dog. I'm not starting another trip because you enjoy dramatic instructions. The men who attacked me may return." Then we should finish before they do. The stranger stared at her. Madge sneezed directly into his beard. Mercedes wiped dog moisture from his cheek with the corner of his expensive cloak. She does that when people sound too serious. I noticed. His dry reply reassured her. Men near death rarely had enough strength for sarcasm. She cut open his ruined shirt and examined the wounds. The claw marks were deep but clean. A narrow blade wound near his ribs concerned her more. Dark veins spread around it. Poison, she murmured. The old man's gaze sharpened. You know it? I know it is trying to turn your side purple. Bodies rarely choose purple without assistance. Mercedes smelled the wound. Bitterroot and iron lay beneath the blood, along with the sweet resin used to seal small poison vials. Her mother had taught her to treat that hunting mixture before fever reached the heart. She reopened the blade, cut enough to flush it, packed the edges with drawing herbs, and mixed her strongest bitterroot antidote. Charcoal formed only one unpleasant part of the drink. The old man looked suspicious. It tastes terrible, Mercedes promised. That is how you know medicine respects tradition. Madge placed one paw on his uninjured thigh. He accepted the cup. While he drank, Mercedes cleaned and packed the wound. She bound his chest with strips cut from the lining of her cloak. The garment was already old, and Madge had slept on it twice. Its decline was official. The broken leg required a splint. Mercedes gathered straight branches while Madge remained beside the stranger. Do not let him leave, she instructed. Madge sat on the edge of his cloak. Efficient, the old man observed. She understands 70 words. Most of them mean food or obstruction. When Mercedes returned, she set the leg. The stranger made one harsh sound and gripped an oak root hard enough to crack the bark. Madge licked his ear. That is her bedside manner, Mercedes explained. Mine includes fewer fluids. She secured the splint, checked his pulse, and finally leaned back. Her knees were numb. Her fingers were red with cold and blood. Mercedes told him he should be dead. Edmund blamed stubbornness, and she wondered whether everyone he met had made the same accusation. The corner of his mouth moved. Mercedes gathered fallen branches and built a small fire beneath the oak's shelter. Madge turned 3 circles beside the old man and lay down against him. Her thick body blocked the wind. The stranger looked at the dog with surprise. Mercedes admitted that Madge rarely trusted strangers. Last winter, she had buried a traveling priest's left shoe as an act of measured criticism. The man rested a hand against Madge's neck. The dog allowed it. Mercedes studied him across the fire. His cloak was finer than anything sold in Glacier Ridge. A silver clasp remained attached near the collar. It showed a mountain split by a crown. She had seen that crest somewhere, perhaps on a royal tax notice. She had not studied the notice closely because the amount had caused temporary blindness. What is your name? She asked. The stranger paused. That pause was too careful. He gave his name as Edmund. When Mercedes asked whether that was all, he added, at present. Mercedes narrowed her eyes. That sounds like a man expecting additional titles to arrive later. He ignored the observation and asked for her name. Mercedes Whitmore. The portable blanket crushing your hip is Madge. Edmund looked down at the dog. Madge? Short, respectable, and easy to shout across a field. As if summoned by criticism, Madge lifted her head. Madge, stay, Mercedes ordered. Edmund's brows rose. What? For one moment, I thought you said Majesty, Mercedes snorted. If she were royalty, breakfast would be compulsory and squirrels would be outlawed. Madge wagged once, apparently satisfied with this political platform. Night gathered around the clearing. The bonding moon rose above the trees, bright enough to silver the snow. Far away, joyful howls drifted from Glacier Ridge. Mercedes heard them and concentrated on tightening Edmund's bandage. He noticed. Edmund noted that she had been meant to attend the ceremony. Mercedes confirmed that she had come looking for Madge instead, partly because the dog wore her good hair ribbon. Edmund waited. Mercedes sieht. Also, she is family. Your family did not come with you? My parents are gone. The pack assumes I can manage myself because I usually do. She said it lightly. She had practiced saying lonely things as if they were weather reports. Edmund looked toward the distant moon. Were you hoping to find a mate tonight? Mercedes called it a personal question from a man whose leg she had just rearranged. Edmund blamed damaged manners on the pain. Your manners looked expensive. I assumed they were insured. His laugh came unexpectedly. It was rough from disuse and ended in a wince. Madge immediately placed her chin on his stomach. Do not encourage him, Mercedes told the dog. He has already lied about his name. Edmund did not deny it. The fire snapped. Wind moved through the pines with a low, ocean-like sound. Mercedes checked the wound again, then wrapped the remaining half of her cloak around his shoulders. Mercedes ordered him to sleep while the antidote worked. Edmund asked what she would do, then reminded her that she did not know him. I need to make sure you keep breathing. Mercedes settled against the oak and pulled Madge's tail over her boots for warmth. You were bleeding. I had bandages. Madge found you. Life does not always need a prophecy. Edmund's expression changed. Something tired and guarded eased behind his eyes. No, he agreed. Perhaps it does not. For the next several hours, he drifted in and out of fever. Mercedes kept the fire alive and forced medicine between his teeth. Madge shared her warmth with both of them while producing snores powerful enough to frighten smaller trees. Near dawn, Edmund woke to find the dog sprawled across his good leg. Edmund whispered that he could not feel his foot. Mercedes explained that Madge's crushing weight meant affection. Dislike would have cost him a shoe. The eastern sky slowly turned gray. When daylight reached the clearing, Edmund's fever had broken. The poison's dark lines were fading. He was still badly hurt, but no longer dying with immediate enthusiasm. Mercedes gave him the last piece of bread from her satchel. He broke it in half. You need food too. I ate earlier. Madge looked at her. Edmund followed the dog's gaze. Did you? Madge has no respect for medical confidentiality. He handed half the bread back. They ate in silence. It was the comfortable kind, interrupted only by Madge attempting to lick crumbs from both people at once. Afterward, Edmund looked at Mercedes with renewed calculation. Can you help me reach the royal seat? She nearly choked. Mercedes repeated the word palace in alarm. Edmund explained that his son lived there. Is he a guard? Edmund's mouth twitched. Something like that. Mercedes examined his splint. The journey would take 3 days at his pace. Returning him to Glacier Ridge made more sense, but rogues might search nearby settlements. Madge rested her head on Edmund's knee and gazed at Mercedes with solemn brown eyes. Do not involve yourself, Mercedes warned her. Madge thumped her tail. Edmund asked whether Madge often made decisions. Mercedes admitted that she did, although most concerned cheese. And this one? He pressed. Mercedes looked back toward Glacier Ridge. The bonding moon was over. Nobody would be waiting for her except Lorna, who would be furious, relieved, and eager for details in that order. Then she looked at the wounded stranger. He carried royal silver, hid his surname, and had enemies willing to poison him. Every sensible instinct told her to deliver him to someone else. Unfortunately, Mercedes's sensible instincts had never learned to speak louder than her conscience. Mercedes decided they would take him, but threatened to leave him on his son's doorstep with a note if the man proved unbearable. When Edmund asked what it would say, she proposed, found in forest, leaks blood, lies badly, feed twice daily. Edmund smiled into his beard. Madge barked once. The former Alpha King of the Northern Realm had been missing for 3 years. His disappearance had nearly broken the kingdom and had certainly broken his son. Mercedes knew none of that. She only knew that Madge had found an injured old man, and injured old men required returning. That misunderstanding was about to become everyone else's problem. Mercedes returned to Glacier Ridge long enough to collect supplies, borrow a handcart, and alarm Lorna beyond speech. The silence lasted 7 seconds. Then Lorna grabbed Mercedes by both shoulders. You missed the bonding moon. Disappeared all night. and returned with blood on your dress. Most of it belongs to a man. This did not improve matters. Mercedes explained while packing blankets and dried meat. She left out Edmund's suspicious cloak clasp because Lorna already looked ready to summon the council, the militia, and possibly a priest. Madge drank an entire bucket of water. Edmund waited beneath the trees outside the village, hidden from curious eyes and supported by the handcart. Lorna demanded to know why Mercedes was taking an injured stranger to the royal seat. Mercedes explained that his son worked there, although Edmund had been vague about the position. Lorna spoke her name like a final warning. I know. Vague men are usually married, criminals, or poets. He is too practical for poetry. Lorna pressed both hands to her face. Then she packed extra bread, because friendship often meant assisting with disasters after failing to prevent them. By mid-morning, Mercedes, Edmund, and Madge were heading south. The handcart worked well on level ground. On hills, it revealed strong opinions. Edmund rode beneath the blankets while Mercedes pulled. Madge walked beside him, occasionally nudging his hand until he scratched her ears. Mercedes, he had failed to mention the mostly upward road. Edmund pointed out that the royal seat lay south. South should have the decency to be downhill. Edmund offered to walk. Mercedes reminded him that his leg currently resembled carpentry and ordered him to remain still. At noon, they stopped beside a stream. Mercedes changed his bandages while Madge investigated every bush. The poison had retreated, but the blade wound remained tender. Edmund asked whether her mother had taught her healing. Mercedes confirmed it and added that her mother never sewed while angry because crooked stitches held grudges. Her mother had served as pack healer whenever the official one was busy taking credit. Mercedes spoke without bitterness. Her mother had treated people because they hurt, not because they could pay. After her death, Mercedes continued the work in a smaller way. She delivered babies, set bones, and made tinctures for people who thanked her with eggs. Edmund thought she deserved a formal position. Mercedes replied that a title would not make feverfew grow faster. He argued it might make people listen. People listen when I threaten the bitter medicine. Madge returned carrying a dead branch twice her length. She attempted to pass between two trees and became confused by geometry. Edmund watched her try 3 times. Edmund called Madge persistent. Mercedes explained that the dog believed the world should adjust around her. He considered that quality admirable in moderation, which sounded enough like personal experience to end the conversation. The old man became interested in the stream. They camped that night in an abandoned shepherd's shelter. The roof leaked in 4 places, the chimney smoked, and Madge selected the only dry bed before either human could object. Mercedes pointed at the floor. Madge, down. The dog closed her eyes. She appears tired, Edmund said. She appears deaf. Mercedes tried pulling the blanket. Madge increased her weight through a method known only to large dogs and stubborn mountains. Edmund hid a smile. Perhaps we should share the other bed. Mercedes looked at the narrow cot. If you fall off, I am not setting the leg again. She arranged Edmund against the wall and sat at the foot with her boots braced on a crate. Madge waited until the room went quiet, then moved from the excellent bed to the floor beside Edmund. Traitor, Mercedes whispered. Madge sighed happily. Edmund slept better that night. By morning, he could stand with a branch as a crutch. Mercedes allowed him to walk for 10 minutes, then returned him to the cart when his face turned gray. They met a royal patrol near midday. 4 mounted warriors emerged from the pines, wearing black and silver. Mercedes placed herself between them and Edmund before she noticed how the old man had gone still. The patrol leader stared beneath Edmund's hood. Edmund gave the smallest shake of his head, then asked the man to come closer. The warrior's expression briefly collapsed. Then discipline rebuilt it. After a quiet exchange, the warrior straightened. Travelers, he said too loudly. The road ahead is safe. Mercedes looked from him to Edmund. Do all royal guards inspect travelers as if they have seen a ghost? Training, Edmund answered. The patrol leader coughed into his glove. Madge wandered to his horse and sniffed its saddlebag. The horse leaned down to greet her. Within moments, the great white dog had acquired a strip of dried venison from a soldier who clearly knew who Edmund was and feared refusing anyone in his company. Do not feed her, Mercedes warned. She will remember you forever. The warrior looked at Madge, then at Edmund. I understand the danger. As they continued south, Mercedes waited until the patrol disappeared. She did not know that Edmund had ordered 2 riders to follow beyond sight. No message was to be sent until they reached the palace, because someone had already betrayed one secret journey. Mercedes asked whether he wished to explain the patrol's reaction. Edmund suggested they had mistaken him for someone, ideally someone living. Someone with a surname? She pressed. He adjusted his blanket. Almost certainly. Mercedes pushed the cart harder than necessary. Madge trotted beside her with stolen venison and no concern for honesty. On the second evening, rain replaced snow. They found a crowded roadside inn where Mercedes spent 1 precious coin convincing the owner that Madge was cleaner than several merchants downstairs. This argument lost credibility when the dog shook Rain across the entrance hall. Edmund kept his hood raised and laughed into his sleeve. By morning, his fever had eased, Madge had acquired breakfast from an unknown source, and Mercedes had stopped asking how. By the 3rd afternoon, white towers appeared beyond the hills. The royal seat filled the valley below. High walls circled a city of slate roofs, bridges, gardens, and watchtowers. At its center stood Ironvale Palace, pale stone rising against the mountains. Mercedes stopped pulling the cart. Mercedes confirmed that his son worked inside the enormous palace. Edmund answered that he did so frequently. She looked at Edmund's cloak clasp again. The split mountain beneath a crown matched the banners flying above the walls. A cold suspicion finally found her. Edmund, what exactly does your son guard? The old man studied the palace. Most of the northern realm. Mercedes closed her eyes. Mercedes reminded Edmund that he had described his son as something like a guard. He defended the claim because his son guarded a great many people. That answer has aged badly. Madge barked toward the city, delighted by its size and unaware that she had escorted a constitutional crisis for 3 days. They descended the final road. Royal guards noticed them before they reached the outer gate. One guard lowered his spear. Another stared at Edmund. A third dropped the apple he was eating. Edmund removed his hood. The gate erupted. Horns sounded from the walls. Soldiers shouted orders. The apple rolled under Madge, who picked it up and ate it during the collapse of military discipline. Former King Edmund! Someone cried. Mercedes's hands slipped from the cart. The man she had ordered to drink charcoal, share bread, and stop arguing with his broken leg was Edmund Ironvale, the lost Alpha King. He had ruled the Northern Realm for 26 years. 3 years ago, he had vanished after his mate's death. Most people believed he was dead. Mercedes looked at him. Edmund offered an apologetic smile. The surname has arrived. I am going to push you back up the hill. Armored warriors surrounded them. Several dropped to one knee. Others stared as if Edmund had walked out of a tomb while complaining about the weather. Madge moved closer to Mercedes and growled. Easy, Mercedes murmured. They are only having a large emotional reaction. The gate captain approached with tears in his eyes. Your Majesty. Madge, stay, Mercedes ordered at the same moment. The captain stopped. So did 3 guards. Edmund looked between them and began laughing. Mercedes pointed at the dog and clarified whom she meant. The captain asked whether her name was Majesty. Madge, Mercedes corrected. She hears cheese when I say please. We all carry burdens. Edmund's laughter turned into a cough, which restored enough order for the guards to remember he was injured. He was lifted from the cart and placed on a stretcher. Carefully, Mercedes warned. His ribs are bound, his left leg is splinted, and the wound near his side was poisoned. The captain straightened. Who treated him? I did. Every guard looked at her patched dress, muddy boots, and hair that had not recovered from 3 days of travel. Edmund's voice became royal for the first time. Mercedes Whitmore saved my life. She and Madge are honored guests. Anyone who forgets that will explain the mistake to me. The yard went silent. Madge stole a second apple. They entered the city beneath escort. People crowded windows and streets as news spread. Bells rang from the palace towers. Mercedes walked beside Edmund's stretcher, increasingly aware that she smelled like rain, dog, and medicinal charcoal. Mercedes muttered that he could have told her. Edmund pointed out that she would not have come. His raised eyebrow forced her to admit she would have left him with the patrol. He called that proof of his wisdom. She called it lying by omission. When Edmund preferred the phrase strategic silence, Mercedes declared it dishonesty wearing a uniform. 2 nearby soldiers failed to hide their smiles. The palace doors opened before them. Inside waited a marble entrance hall filled with guards, healers, servants, advisors, and nobles who had abandoned whatever they were doing. Mercedes barely noticed the gold ceiling or towering columns. The air had changed. Dominance rolled through the hall like approaching thunder. People moved aside. At the far end, a tall man came down the staircase with long, controlled strides. Alpha King Dominic Ironvale looked like someone had carved authority into human form and forgotten to include patience. Dark chestnut hair brushed his collar. A close beard framed a severe mouth. His storm gray eyes fixed on Edmund. For 3 years, Dominic had ruled while grieving a father who had disappeared without explanation. Now that father lay alive on a stretcher beside a muddy healer and an enormous white dog chewing an apple. Father. The single word carried relief, fury, and enough pain to silence the entire hall. Edmund's humor vanished. Dominic. The younger king stopped beside the stretcher. His hand closed around the wooden frame. Dominic confirmed that his father was alive, then accused him of leaving. Edmund answered both facts without defense. Mercedes watched them attempt to have 3 years of grief using 4 words. It was painful, impressive, and deeply inefficient. Dominic's gaze dropped to the bandages. Who did this? The useful part or the bleeding part? Mercedes asked. Every head turned. She considered pretending someone else had spoken. Madge leaned against her leg, eliminating escape. Edmund indicated Mercedes. She treated me after rogues attacked. Dominic looked at her fully. His eyes were colder than the forest, but the anger in them was not directed at her. He saw the dried blood on her sleeves and the frayed edge of her cloak. Then he noticed Madge. The dog walked forward. Mercedes caught her collar. Madge, stay. Dominic stopped. A guard made a choking sound. Mercedes looked from the king to her dog. This is going to become a problem, isn't it? For the first time, something almost human moved at the corner of Dominic's mouth. Then Madge broke free, crossed the marble floor, and sat on the Alpha King's left boot. The hall waited for death. Dominic looked down at 80 pounds of white fur occupying his foot. Madge looked up and offered him the wet remains of the stolen apple. She likes you, Mercedes explained. Or she thinks you have food. Her emotions are practical. Dominic slowly crouched and took the apple core before it stained his boot. Madge licked his chin. The most powerful wolf in the northern realm closed his eyes. Edmund, still on the stretcher, smiled with unbearable satisfaction. Welcome home, he told his son. Dominic wiped dog saliva from his beard. We will discuss your definition of home later. Mercedes decided she liked him slightly. Only slightly. Palace healers carried Edmund away while Dominic issued orders with terrifying efficiency. Mercedes followed until a woman in green robes attempted to separate her from Madge. The animal cannot enter the royal infirmary, the healer said. Madge sat. The healer pulled gently on the lead. Madge remained where she was and somehow became heavier. She can, Mercedes explained, or the infirmary can move around her. Dominic approached from behind them. Everyone nearby straightened. Let the dog enter. The healer bowed and released the lead. Madge rose at once. Dominic observed that Madge had understood the exchange. Mercedes explained that the dog only understood how resistance produced a king. He objected that government should not work that way. She suggested informing his nobles. His gaze returned to Mercedes. For one dangerous heartbeat, she wondered if she had finally spoken herself into a dungeon. Instead, Dominic gave a quiet breath that might have been amusement. My father said you were direct. Your father says many things when avoiding useful information. This time, the king's almost smile was unmistakable. Edmund's injuries were treated again by 6 royal healers, who removed Mercedes's bandages and replaced them with identical bandages made from finer cloth. She stood at the foot of the bed with crossed arms. The senior healer praised the splint. Mercedes called it 2 branches and a belt, which the healer upgraded to excellent branches. The fracture had already begun knitting through shifter healing. The healer warned that this explained the speed, not Edmund's belief that medical orders were optional. Edmund lay against white pillows and looked healthier by the minute. Royal blood apparently improved in expensive rooms. Dominic stood near the window. His shoulders remained rigid. He had not left since his father entered the infirmary, yet he had spoken to him only about wounds, attackers, and patrol routes. Mercedes recognized avoidance when it wore a crown. You should both speak, she said. Father and son looked at her. About something that does not involve poison, she clarified. Dominic called it a family matter. Mercedes agreed, noting that families were usually where communication went to die. Edmund covered his mouth. The king demanded to know whether Edmund was laughing. His father blamed the medicine, but Mercedes warned that excuse rarely survived witnesses. Dominic dismissed the healers, then asked Mercedes to remain. She suspected this was because his father behaved better under threat of bitter tincture. The conversation began badly. Before grief entered the room, Dominic demanded the full account of the attack. Edmund admitted he had finally decided to return after 3 years of wandering. He traveled quietly because he feared a public arrival would become a political spectacle. At a remote royal way station, a clerk recognized him despite the plain cloak. Riders found Edmund before sunset, proving the news had reached someone faster than it reached the palace. He escaped in wolf form, but the poisoned blade forced him back into human shape. A fall down the frozen slope broke his leg near Glacier Ridge. The patrol routes now made sense. So did Edmund's order that the soldiers follow without sending a message. Until Dominic knew who had leaked his father's return, even royal channels could not be trusted. Edmund apologized for disappearing. Dominic answered that 3 years required more than one sentence. Edmund tried to explain that grief had made the palace unbearable after Katerina's death. Dominic's restraint finally cracked. You lost your mate, he said, voice low. I lost my mother and my father on the same day. The words landed hard. Edmund looked older than he had in the forest. Mercedes rested a hand on Madge's head. The dog leaned against her. No joke could repair this moment, so she allowed the silence to hold it. Edmund eventually admitted the ugliest truth. He had run because remaining required him to feel his grief while also watching his sons. Wandering had been easier than facing what he had broken. Dominic turned toward the window. I am not asking you to forgive me today, Edmund continued. I am asking for the chance to stop leaving. Madge crossed the room and pushed her nose into Dominic's hand. The king stared down at her. She dislikes prolonged misery, Mercedes said softly. It delays meals. Dominic scratched behind the dog's ear. You may stay, he told his father. We will speak again when I can do so without breaking furniture. Edmund nodded. That seems fair. It is the warmest invitation you are getting today, Mercedes advised. Dominic left before his expression could betray him. Edmund watched the door and admitted he deserved worse. Mercedes agreed, then directed him toward the plentiful pillows when he criticized her unusual comfort. Mercedes expected to leave the next morning. Instead, Edmund developed a mild fever. Madge refused to abandon him, and Dominic insisted that the woman who recognized the poison remain available. The palace gave Mercedes a guest suite larger than her cottage, complete with 3 servants and a tub big enough to launch a fishing boat. She dismissed the servants by insisting she still knew where her sleeves were. Madge claimed the tub before anyone could object, which made the room feel less intimidating. At dinner, Mercedes discovered that palace tables possessed more forks than any food could justify. She sat beside Edmund, who had escaped the infirmary using a cane and selective deafness. Dominic occupied the head of the table. 12 advisors and nobles sat around them. Madge lay under Mercedes's chair because the kitchen had forbidden her entry. This prohibition had lasted until Madge learned where the second door was. A servant placed a tiny arrangement of vegetables before Mercedes. She studied it. "Is this decoration?" Lord Ashworth, Dominic's senior advisor, gave her a thin smile. "It is the first course." Ashworth was broad, silver-haired, and polished enough to reflect suspicion. His clothes smelled faintly of cedar oil and the same sweet resin Mercedes had noticed on Edmund's wound. Madge's head emerged from beneath the table. The dog sniffed. Then she growled. Every conversation stopped. "Madge," Mercedes warned. Ashworth ordered her to control the animal. Mercedes explained that Madge found some perfumes morally troubling. When he denied wearing any, she concluded the dislike was personal. Dominic coughed into his fist. Edmund became fascinated by his soup. Mercedes lured Madge back with bread. She noticed the dog continued watching Ashworth. Madge rarely growled without reason, but she sometimes considered hats a reason. Mercedes stored the detail away. The second course involved fish and a narrow fork whose purpose remained hostile. Mercedes chose a normal fork. Ashworth observed her. "Royal etiquette can be difficult for those unused to court. So can eating while someone counts your forks." Edmund choked on his wine. Dominic's eyes flashed with reluctant humor. Ashworth did not speak to her again. After dinner, Dominic found Mercedes in the corridor, trying to recover Madge from a decorative fountain. The dog stood in the shallow water, drinking from the mouth of a marble swan. "She has water in your rooms," Dominic noted. "This water has architecture." Together, they persuaded Madge to step out. She shook herself before either could retreat. Water covered Dominic's black coat. Mercedes froze. 2 guards froze. Madge wagged. The Alpha King looked down at himself. Mercedes offered an explanation, reconsidered under Dominic's gaze, and admitted she could only leave quickly. Dominic laughed. It was brief and startled, as if the sound had escaped a locked room. The guards stared at the wall with heroic concentration. Mercedes smiled despite herself. Mercedes told him to do that more often. Dominic asked whether she meant getting soaked by dogs. "Laugh. The soaking appears to happen without effort." They walked toward the guest wing while Madge left wet paw prints across priceless stone. Dominic asked how Mercedes had found his father. She told him the full story, including the untouched dinner, the blood, the lie about being a guard, and Madge's medical use as a heated blanket. The king listened closely. Dominic noted that she had given up the bonding moon to search for Madge. Mercedes defended the choice by praising the dog's conversation. He asked whether she had wanted to attend. Mercedes considered lying. Dominic's attention made honesty feel more dangerous than usual. "Part of me did, not because I expected destiny to fall on my head. I just wanted to know whether there was someone who might choose me." Dominic stopped beneath an arched window. Moonlight silvered his hair and softened the hard lines of his face. Dominic said her pack had not valued her. Mercedes argued they valued her when bones needed setting. That is use, not value. The distinction struck more deeply than she expected. Madge pressed between them, possibly from emotional sensitivity, and possibly because she had found a biscuit in Dominic's pocket. The king surrendered the biscuit. Mercedes demanded to know why he now carried dog treats. Dominic claimed the biscuit came from dinner and that putting it in his pocket showed planning. 3 days ago, you did not know she existed. Dominic looked down at Madge. She is persuasive. The dog accepted this tribute and walked on. Mercedes began to suspect the Alpha King was not cold. He was simply built like a fortress and equally poor at inviting visitors. During the following week, Edmund recovered enough to become troublesome. He ignored bed rest, borrowed servants' clothing to escape the infirmary, and appeared in unexpected places with explanations nobody believed. Mercedes found him in the library, the kitchens, and once behind a curtain near Dominic's council chamber. Mercedes whispered that hiding behind upholstery looked remarkably like spying. Edmund claimed he was merely waiting and blamed the drafty corridor. Dominic opened the curtain from the other side. Edmund and Mercedes stared at him. Madge sat between them, holding one of Dominic's gloves. "I can explain," Edmund began. "No one in this family can," Dominic replied. Mercedes held up both hands. "I am not in this family." Edmund and Dominic looked at her. Their simultaneous silence was deeply suspicious. She pointed at Madge. "The dog brought me." Dominic recovered his glove. "Of course." Edmund's efforts to place Mercedes and Dominic together became increasingly transparent. He requested that they show him the winter gardens, then claimed fatigue after 6 steps. He arranged a private dinner for 3 and failed to appear. He sent Dominic to inspect a non-existent leak in Mercedes's bathing chamber. That final attempt nearly ended his recovery. "There is no leak," Dominic told his father. Edmund looked confused. "It may have repaired itself." "Pipes do that here?" Mercedes asked. "Ancient palace." Dominic folded his arms. "Father, fine. I thought you both needed a practical problem." "You are the practical problem," Mercedes informed him. Madge barked agreement. Despite Edmund's interference, Mercedes and Dominic developed their own rhythm. He showed her the palace gardens without pretending anyone had a medical emergency. She explained which winter plants could be used for fever and which would cause a rash in embarrassing places. He invited her to observe a council session because she knew the poison used against Edmund. She interrupted a border commander who confused 2 herbs and prevented him from ordering soldiers to burn the wrong fields. Dominic began asking her opinion directly. Mercedes began noticing how he listened. He did not treat kindness as softness. He did not praise her merely to make her comfortable. When she was right, he used the information. When she was wrong, he said so without cruelty. Madge approved of him for simpler reasons. He carried meat and possessed a large office rug. Within days, Dominic had accepted that royal authority ended wherever the dog chose to sleep. Mercedes noticed a map covered in red marks. "More rogue attacks?" His humor faded. 3 supply posts in 2 weeks. Whoever attacked my father may be coordinating them. She leaned over the map. The raids formed a line along the southern border. Each target stored medicine, grain, or weapons. Mercedes observed that the raiders knew both what to take and when each target would be unguarded. Dominic confirmed that this was his concern. Madge woke and sniffed the edge of the map. Then she sneezed. "Excellent contribution," Mercedes told her. Dominic rested both hands on the desk. "I leave tomorrow to inspect the southern posts." The news tightened something in Mercedes's chest. She disguised it with irritation. Mercedes told him not to return looking like his father. Dominic guessed she meant old. "Leaking." His gray eyes warmed. "I will make an effort." Madge pushed her head under his hand. Dominic scratched her ears and looked at Mercedes over the dog's white fur. For one quiet moment, the room felt smaller. The air carried paper, cedar smoke, and the faint warmth of him. Mercedes's wolf stirred inside her, not with the thunderous certainty of prophecy. It simply lifted its head, alert and interested. Dominic seemed to feel something too. His hands stopped moving. Then Madge sneezed on the map. The moment ended. Mercedes thanked Madge for saving them from a dangerous amount of eye contact. Dominic claimed he had been reviewing troop positions. Of course. With your face? Dominic looked offended for nearly 2 seconds. Then he laughed again. Dominic left before sunrise with 2 companies of warriors. Mercedes did not stand at the gate to watch him go. She was a practical woman with no interest in dramatic departures. She watched from an upstairs window instead, which was completely different because nobody could see her worrying. Madge sat beside her and fogged the glass. We are checking the weather, Mercedes told the dog. Madge looked at the cloudless sky. Your skepticism is unattractive. Below, Dominic mounted a black horse. He glanced toward the guest wing, found Mercedes behind the window, and raised one hand. She raised hers. Madge planted both front paws on the sill and barked so loudly that 3 horses sidestepped. Dominic's soldiers rode south beneath a gray dawn. Edmund appeared in the doorway wearing a robe and the expression of a man who had discovered exactly what he hoped to discover. Mercedes warned Edmund not to comment. He protested that he had said nothing. Your eyebrows are giving a speech. He came to stand beside her. He will return. He had better. I have not finished criticizing his medical habits. Edmund smiled, but worry shadowed his face too. Father and son had spoken every evening since his return. Their conversations remained difficult, yet neither man walked away. That was progress. In the Ironvale family, progress apparently required locked doors and reinforced furniture. For 2 days, no message came. Mercedes helped in the infirmary, reviewed poison records, and attempted to keep Edmund from reorganizing the palace while technically still a patient. Madge became popular among the servants. She collected snacks from 5 kitchens and affection from everyone except Lord Ashworth. Whenever the advisor entered a room, the dog watched him. On the second afternoon, Mercedes found Ashworth near Edmund's chambers. He claimed he had come to deliver reports. Madge stood between him and the door with her head low. That animal is becoming a nuisance, he complained. She has been a nuisance for years. Becoming one would imply effort. Ashworth's gaze sharpened. You enjoy forgetting your position. I remember it. I am standing in a corridor while you argue with a dog. His face tightened. Then Edmund opened his door and Ashworth recovered his polished smile. Madge did not. That night, a storm rolled over the city. Rain hammered the windows. Wind moaned through the towers. Near midnight, horns sounded from the outer wall. Mercedes was out of bed before the second blast. Madge raced beside her through the corridor. They reached the entrance hall as wounded warriors began arriving. The southern force had returned. Armor clanged against stone. Wet boots left dark tracks across the floor. Blood and rain filled the air with the metallic smell of battle. Mercedes searched the crowd. Dominic entered under his own power, which was the good news. The bad news was everything else. Blood soaked his left side. A cut crossed his temple. One sleeve hung in strips, and his expression promised violence to anyone who mentioned that he was limping. His eyes found Mercedes. Relief moved across his face before command buried it. Treat the others first, he ordered the palace healers. Mercedes reached him and looked at the blood. Mercedes reminded Dominic of his promise not to leak. He claimed an effort, which she reclassified as decorative bleeding. One of his captains laughed, then disguised it as coughing. Dominic swayed. Mercedes caught his arm. Madge pushed against his other side, producing the least dignified royal procession in recent memory. My warriors need care, Dominic insisted. They are receiving it. You are coming with me before you collapse and flatten the dog. Madge barked. She agrees, and she is difficult to overrule. Mercedes led him to a nearby treatment room. Dominic sat on the table while she cut away his shirt. His injuries were painful, but not fatal. A blade had sliced along his ribs. Claws had opened his shoulder. Bruises covered enough skin to suggest he had argued with the ground and lost. Mercedes cleaned the wounds. Dominic hissed when the alcohol touched his side. Mercedes accused the great Alpha King of fearing disinfectant. He denied fearing anything, although his left eyebrow had clearly surrendered. He watched her thread a needle. You seem cheerful. I become talkative when frightened. The admission slipped out. Her hands stopped. Dominic's expression changed. Dominic realized she had been frightened for him. Mercedes disguised it as concern about the administrative consequences of replacing a king. He accepted this explanation with false solemnity while she mourned the imaginary forms. His hand closed gently around her wrist. Mercedes looked up. The storm beat against the windows. Madge lay across the doorway, preventing anyone from entering without negotiation. Candlelight warmed Dominic's scarred face. Dominic admitted thinking about her during the battle. Mercedes called that tactically unwise, and he agreed. The humor faded between them, leaving something more honest. Dominic admitted he had felt drawn to her from their first meeting. He had resisted naming it because his father's grief had shaped his entire understanding of love. To Dominic, loving someone had always seemed like giving fate a weapon. Mercedes tied off a stitch. That is not love's fault, she said. Your father made a terrible decision while grieving. You make terrible decisions while fully rested. Dominic stared at her. Mercedes reminded him that he rode into an ambush after promising not to leak. His defense that they had not expected an ambush improved nothing. His mouth curved despite the pain. Mercedes set the needle aside. I feel something too. My wolf notices you. Madge notices your pockets. Which is more meaningful? Madge has higher standards. Dominic raised a hand and touched her cheek. His fingers were warm and careful. May I kiss you? Mercedes considered making him wait. It seemed useful for his character. Then Madge stood, walked between his knees, and shoved her head under his arm. Dominic's hand slid from Mercedes's cheek to the dog's forehead. The king closed his eyes. She did that deliberately. She believes physical affection belongs to the public. Madge leaned harder. Mercedes began laughing. Dominic tried to remain offended, but the effort failed. He bent forward until his forehead rested against Mercedes's. Dominic murmured that he still wanted the kiss when Madge permitted it. Mercedes advised him to submit a written request directly to the dog, who controlled the schedule. Dominic finally kissed her after Mercedes bribed the dog with a folded towel. It was not a thunderclap. No stars shook. No invisible voice declared destiny complete. It was warm, hesitant, and real. Dominic tasted faintly of rain. Mercedes' hands rested against his shoulders, careful of the wounds. His restraint lasted only until she moved closer. Then a metal basin crashed in the corridor. They broke apart. Edmund stood beyond Madge with one hand on the fallen basin and innocence badly arranged across his face. Edmund claimed he had been looking for bandages. Dominic asked why that search had placed him in the doorway while Mercedes accused him of listening. Only after I heard nothing, Edmund replied. Dominic pointed down the corridor. Go. Edmund retreated with surprising speed. Madge followed him, abandoning her duties the moment intrigue became mobile. Mercedes called Edmund a menace. Dominic reminded her that she had brought him home, but she transferred responsibility to Madge. Then I owe her both gratitude and blame. Dominic drew Mercedes close again. This kiss was interrupted only by his ribs, which objected to enthusiasm. She pushed him back onto the table. Mercedes ordered romance postponed until after the stitches. Dominic called her commanding, and she reminded him that he had met her dog. The next morning brought worse news. The southern attack had not been random. Rogues knew where Royal Scouts were stationed. They struck during a shift change discussed only in council. Someone inside the palace had given them information. Dominic convened the inner council despite Mercedes's threat to tie him to a chair. He compromised by attending with his ribs bandaged and Madge lying across the doorway. Mercedes sat beside Edmund. Several nobles objected to her presence until Dominic stated that she had recognized the poison, treated both kings, and noticed details others missed. Also, Edmund added, the dog will not leave without her. Madge yawned. The meeting reviewed maps, patrol schedules, and reports. Lord Ashworth argued that the rogues must have captured a messenger. Mercedes listened. Each successful raid had occurred within 2 days of a council session. Each target had been discussed privately. The ambush against Dominic used a false distress signal bearing a seal from the Western Command. The traitor needed access to plans and royal seals. Madge rose suddenly. Ashworth had opened a leather folder across the table. The dog crossed the chamber, sniffed the folder, and growled. Ashworth snapped it shut. Remove her. Mercedes caught Madge's collar. A familiar sweet scent reached her beneath the cedar oil. Her memory returned to the forest. The poison itself had smelled of bitterroot and iron. The same unusual resin had sealed the vial before the blade was coated. Now that resin clung to Ashworth's leather folder. It was suspicious, but not proof. A court could not convict a man because his stationery smelled wrong. Mercedes did not accuse him immediately. Dogs could identify danger, but courts preferred evidence that did not shed. She apologized and led Madge outside. Dominic joined her moments later. Dominic asked what she had noticed. Mercedes identified the scent as resin from the poison vial used against Edmund, while warning that someone else could have handled the same material. Dominic went still. Dominic asked whether she was certain. She was certain enough to investigate, but not to execute anyone before breakfast. He denied doing that. Mercedes approved because executions affected digestion. Together, they formed a trap. At the next council session, Dominic announced that medicine and grain would be moved through Eastbridge in 3 days. The real convoy would take the Western Road. Only the people in that room heard the false plan. They marked every copy of the route with a slightly different error. Ashworth's map showed a ruined mill near Eastbridge that had burned 10 years earlier. Then they waited. Waiting proved harder than battle because it offered Madge time to improve the operation. She followed Ashworth whenever possible. She sat outside his office. She stole one glove and delivered it to Mercedes. She attempted to enter his carriage through the window. Subtlety, Mercedes told her, pulling the dog down. We are practicing subtlety. Madge sneezed. Dominic observed that Madge disagreed with subtlety. Mercedes explained that the dog preferred standing on problems, which he called a common royal philosophy. On the second night, a palace scout returned from Eastbridge. Rogues had gathered near the ruined mill. The false information had leaked. Dominic ordered Ashworth's office searched. They found nothing at first. The advisor had hidden his correspondence well. Madge entered during the search, sniffed the carpet, and began scratching beneath a cabinet. 2 guards moved the furniture. A loose floorboard lay below. Inside were coded letters, copied patrol schedules, royal sealing wax, and a poison vial stopped with the same sweet resin. Ashworth was arrested before dawn. He did not deny the betrayal. He had supported Dominic during the first year of his reign, then grown convinced that grief and youth made the king weak. Edmund's return threatened the political control Ashworth had spent years building. The clerk at the remote way station had been one of Ashworth's paid eyes. After learning Edmund was alive and returning home, Ashworth sent rogues to capture him. When Edmund escaped, Ashworth ordered him killed. You would put a village healer beside the throne, Ashworth accused Dominic during the confrontation. You let sentiment govern you. Mercedes stood near the door with Madge. For accuracy, she said, the healer found the evidence. The dog found the floorboard. Your defeat was a group effort. Ashworth looked at her with hatred. Madge growled, and she would like credit for the glove. Dominic's command filled the chamber before Ashworth could reply. Take him. The guards led the traitor away. Edmund remained beside his son. Pain showed in both their faces. Ashworth had served the family for decades. Betrayal hurt most when it wore a familiar voice. Mercedes did not offer a speech about strength or destiny. She placed one hand in Dominic's and the other on Edmund's shoulder. Madge leaned against all three of them. After a moment, Edmund looked down. "She is standing on my injured foot." "That is emotional support," Mercedes explained. "It is very emotional." Dominic laughed quietly, and some of the darkness left the room. With Ashworth's letters exposed, the rogue network unraveled quickly. Border leaders captured the remaining commanders. Stolen supplies were recovered. The southern villages began repairing what had been damaged. The palace prepared a formal celebration. Mercedes attempted to avoid it. She failed because Edmund controlled the invitations, Dominic controlled the guards, and Madge controlled the doorway. The celebration filled the great hall with silver banners, winter flowers, musicians, and enough polished tableware to blind an approaching army. Mercedes stood in her rooms while three attendants adjusted a deep green gown around her. The dress was beautiful. It was also equipped with sleeves that required negotiation and a skirt wide enough to collect furniture. Mercedes objected that the gown had no pockets. The eldest attendant explained that formal women relied on companions to carry useful things. Mercedes looked at Madge. The dog wore a green ribbon around her neck and carried half a dinner roll in her mouth. "My companion is occupied." The attendants had tried bathing Madge that morning. Two remained emotionally changed by the experience. Mercedes hid a small medicine pouch beneath the decorative sash and declared the gown functional. When she entered the hall, conversation slowed. Not because she had transformed into a mysterious beauty. Everyone had already seen her muddy, furious, and covered in royal blood. They were surprised she had agreed to wear sleeves. Dominic waited near the head table in formal black and silver. His wounds were healing, though Mercedes noticed he still favored one side. His gaze settled on her. For once, the Alpha King failed to hide what he felt. Warmth rose through Mercedes's face. Madge chose that moment to step on the back of her skirt. Mercedes stopped. The skirt did not. She lurched backward, caught a column, and remained upright through determination and architectural support. Dominic reached her in 3 strides. "Are you hurt?" "Only in front of the entire kingdom." He looked down at Madge, who was sitting on the gown. "Release her." Madge wagged. Dominic produced a strip of dried meat from his sleeve. Mercedes narrowed her eyes. "You planned for this. I govern according to known threats." Madge accepted the bribe and moved. Dominic offered Mercedes his arm. "You look beautiful. I am carrying fever medicine under the sash. You look prepared." That compliment pleased her more. Edmund watched them approach with the satisfied expression of a man claiming credit for weather. He wore formal robes but still used a cane. Mercedes suspected he no longer needed it. He enjoyed pointing the silver handle at people who annoyed him. "You are late," he observed. "Your future daughter-in-law was detained by your other future daughter-in-law," Dominic replied. Mercedes nearly tripped again. Edmund beamed. Madge barked. "No one has asked me anything." Mercedes reminded both men. Dominic's confidence disappeared. Edmund looked delighted by his son's panic. Dominic insisted that he intended to ask, though not in the middle of the hall. Mercedes approved because she hated the idea of answering while Lord Fenwick chewed. Across the room, Lord Fenwick stopped chewing. Mercedes lowered her voice. "Ask when you are ready, preferably before your father designs invitations." Edmund slowly moved one hand behind his back. Dominic noticed Edmund's guilty hand and accused him of designing invitations. Edmund called it exploring paper choices and assured them he had rejected an excessive silver border. Mercedes took Edmund's cane and pointed it toward the table. "Sit down before I prescribe another month of bed rest." The former king obeyed. The feast began with speeches. Dominic thanked the soldiers, healers, scouts, and villages that had resisted the rogues. He acknowledged his father's return without pretending their lost years had vanished. Then he called Mercedes forward. She had expected gratitude for saving Edmund. She had not expected Dominic to offer her a permanent position as royal healer for rural affairs. The title came with authority to train village healers, inspect medical stores, and report directly to the crown. Mercedes stared at him. Mercedes accused Dominic of inventing the position. He said she had identified the need and permitted her to shorten its unwieldy name. Her first official demand concerned pockets in the uniform. Dominic looked toward the royal tailor. Apparently. Applause filled the hall. Mercedes accepted because the work mattered, not because it placed her near Dominic. The fact that it placed her near Dominic was a separate administrative benefit. Madge received a silver tag engraved with the royal crest. She tried to eat it. After dinner, music began. Dominic asked Mercedes to dance. Mercedes questioned whether his healing ribs could dance. Dominic proposed moving slowly. She warned that her dancing resembled furniture falling downstairs, so he agreed they would fall slowly. He led her onto the floor. Dominic moved with controlled grace. Mercedes counted under her breath and stepped on him only twice. Both incidents involved the same foot, which she considered efficient. Other couples gave them room. Mercedes whispered that the other couples feared him. Dominic blamed her dancing, which she considered evidence of a wise kingdom. His hand rested against her back. Their eyes met. This time, Madge did not interrupt. She was beneath the musician's platform, receiving illegal pieces of roast beef. Dominic repeated that he felt drawn to her. Mercedes asked whether the stitches had changed anything. His suggestion that they helped was concerning. Dominic valued that she spoke to him as a man. Mercedes said he had never convinced her he was anything else. Everyone at court saw the crown first. Madge saw his pockets. Dominic wanted to know what Mercedes saw. Mercedes considered him. She saw the king who carried a realm without complaint. She also saw the son who still hurt, the patient who lied about pain, and the man who kept dog treats in formal clothing. I see someone learning to laugh before he breaks furniture. Dominic drew her a little closer. That may be the kindest thing anyone has said to me. Your court needs better material. When the dance ended, they escaped to the winter garden. Moonlight shone through the glass roof. Warded roses bloomed despite the snow outside. The air smelled of damp earth and citrus trees. Edmund was nowhere visible. Mercedes checked behind the nearest curtain. What are you doing? Dominic asked. Learning from experience. They found no former kings, advisors, musicians, or dogs. Dominic led her to the fountain where they had first spoken alone. He appeared more nervous than he had before battle. Dominic warned that life beside him would never be quiet. Mercedes had not known quiet since Madge learned to bark. He added duties, arguments, and danger. She added the forms he had already warned her about. Dominic took her hands. He did not offer a crown or describe her as the answer to an ancient destiny. He told her he admired her courage, trusted her judgment, and felt happier whenever she entered a room. Then he asked whether she wanted to build a life with him. Mercedes looked at the severe, careful man who had learned to carry biscuits and listen to village healers. Mercedes answered yes, but attached conditions. Dominic accepted the ban on disappearing into forests for 3 years. When she forbade him from refusing treatment, he promised to attempt improvement. Mercedes waited until he changed that weak promise into agreement. Her final condition required Madge to sleep outside the bedroom. A white head appeared from behind a citrus planter. Dominic looked at the dog. That condition may exceed royal authority. Edmund rose from behind the next planter and blamed Madge for leading him there. Mercedes noted that he had brought wine and 2 glasses. He claimed preparation for either answer. Dominic demanded to know how much he had heard. Edmund blamed the loud fountain, then reused strategic silence when his son rejected the excuse. Mercedes laughed so hard she had to sit on the fountain's edge. Dominic attempted anger, failed, and accepted a glass of wine. The 4 of them remained in the garden until the music ended. Edmund spoke of Katerina without collapsing beneath the memory. Dominic listened without shutting him out. Mercedes leaned against Dominic's shoulder. Madge lay across both their feet. It was not a perfect family. It was a family still learning how to stay. In the following weeks, palace life found a new rhythm. Edmund attended council as an advisor and irritated Dominic by knowing where every old law was buried. He also apologized in smaller, more useful ways. He showed up for meals. He kept promises. He stopped hiding behind curtains unless the reason was excellent. Mercedes reorganized rural medicine while refusing every proposed title containing the words delicate, noble, or royal flower. Her final title became Chief Village Healer. It fit on a door. Madge acquired responsibilities without permission. She inspected visiting carriages, attended council meetings, and slept outside Edmund's rooms whenever his nightmares returned. She also continued growling at dishonest people. This made diplomatic receptions shorter. Dominic developed the habit of visiting Mercedes's office near sunset. He claimed he needed reports. The reports rarely required tea, biscuits, or an hour of conversation. Spring came to the valley. When Glacier Ridge sent Mercedes another bonding moon invitation, she declined it. She returned later as chief village healer and established a training program without speeches, revenge, or ceremonial approval. Lorna hugged her, scolded her for writing badly, and observed that missing one ceremony had somehow brought Mercedes 2 damaged kings. Greedy, Lorna concluded. Mercedes could not entirely disagree. That summer, Dominic and Mercedes held a small mating ceremony in the palace garden. There were no blood vows, no grand prophecy, and no speeches about perfect destiny. They made promises they could keep. Dominic promised to return. Mercedes promised to tell him when fear hid beneath her jokes. They both promised to choose each other on ordinary days when nothing dramatic required courage. Edmund served as witness. Madge carried the rings in a pouch attached to her ribbon. This plan failed when she discovered a sausage table. The ceremony paused while 2 kings, 1 healer, and 6 guards pursued a great Pyrenees through the roses. Dominic finally cornered her near the fountain. Madge, stay! The dog stopped. So did every servant within hearing distance. Mercedes arrived breathless and laughing. You see the problem now. Dominic recovered the rings. I have always seen the problem. You give her meat from your sleeves. That is diplomacy. They completed the ceremony with grass on their clothes, dog fur on Dominic's formal coat, and laughter replacing every trace of royal solemnity. Months later, Mercedes found Edmund asleep beneath an oak in the palace garden. Madge lay beside him with her head on his good leg. The sight carried her back to the frozen forest, the blood beneath the tree, and an old man lying badly about his name. Edmund opened one eye. Edmund accused her of staring. Mercedes explained that she was remembering when Madge found him. He praised the dog's judgment. She once ate a curtain. Edmund dismissed it as a poor curtain. Mercedes sat beside them. Dominic joined her soon after, carrying tea and 3 biscuits. Madge woke at the sound of the tin. Edmund accepted a cup. Have you ever wondered what would have happened if she had returned for dinner? Mercedes scratched the dog's thick neck. Mercedes decided she would have attended the ceremony. Edmund would have continued bleeding, and Dominic would still frighten furniture. Dominic denied frightening furniture. She reminded him about last week's broken council chair, which he defended as structurally weak. Edmund claimed that trait came from him. That explains nothing good. Madge moved into Mercedes's lap despite weighing far too much for the arrangement. Dominic took the dog's back half. Edmund stole one of the biscuits. The palace bells rang over the valley. Bees moved among the roses. Somewhere inside, an advisor was probably searching for Dominic. He made no effort to leave. Mercedes had once wondered whether anyone would choose her. The answer had not arrived beneath a ceremonial moon. It had arrived muddy, bleeding, dishonest, and escorted by a dog who never missed dinner. Madge had saved an old man in the forest. Mercedes had saved his life. Edmund had returned to his son. Dominic had learned that love was not a weapon waiting to be used against him. And Mercedes had found a family where her bluntness was useful, her kindness was respected, and every important room contained emergency dog treats. Madge lifted her head when a servant crossed the lawn. "Your Majesty," the servant called. The dog and both kings looked up. Mercedes leaned back against the oak and laughed. Some misunderstandings were too useful to correct. If this story grabbed your heart, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss our next story. We'll see you in the next one.